The gunshot that shattered the Sunday morning peace sent every respectable woman in Oatman, Arizona diving for cover. But Penelope Hart just laughed as she hit 3 bottles in quick succession from 50 yards away. It was June of 1882, and the small mining town tucked into the Black Mountains had seen plenty of wild characters drift through on their way to somewhere else. But Penelope was different because she had been born right there in that dusty collection of buildings, and had no intention of leaving or changing for anyone. Her father, Samuel Hart, had struck silver in the nearby hills when Penelope was just a baby, and the wealth that followed had given her opportunities most frontier girls never dreamed of. He had sent her to San Francisco for 2 years of schooling when she was 14, hoping the city would polish away her rough edges and turn her into a proper lady. Instead, she had returned at 16 even wilder than before, with radical ideas about women's rights and a complete disregard for the social conventions that governed respectable society. Now at 23, she was considered the most unmarriageable woman in 3 territories, despite being beautiful enough to stop traffic and wealthy enough to buy half the town. The problem, as the townswomen never tired of explaining to anyone who would listen, was that Penelope Hart refused to act like a woman should act. She wore split riding skirts instead of proper dresses, spent her days breaking horses on her father's ranch instead of practicing needlepoint, could drink most men under the table, and had opinions on everything from mining operations to territorial politics that she expressed loudly and without invitation. She had turned down 7 marriage proposals in the last 5 years, including one from the mayor's son and another from a wealthy rancher who owned 10,000 acres near Prescott. "You will die an old maid," her mother Margaret had warned her just that morning at breakfast, wringing her hands in despair. "No decent man wants a wife who can outshoot him and talks back at every opportunity." Penelope had just smiled and reached for another biscuit, unbothered by the prediction. She had watched too many of her schoolmates from San Francisco marry men who immediately set about crushing every interesting thing about them, turning vibrant young women into silent shadows who existed only to manage households and produce children. If that was what marriage required, she wanted no part of it. She finished her target practice and headed back toward town, her horse Thunder moving at an easy canter beneath her. The animal was a massive black stallion that her father had given her for her 21st birthday, and he was as wild and stubborn as she was. The other ranchers had told Samuel he was wasting a perfectly good horse by giving him to a woman, but Penelope had gentled Thunder herself over 6 months of patient work, and now he would let no one else ride him. Main Street was quiet in the late morning heat, most sensible people taking shelter from the sun that beat down mercilessly on the desert town. Oatman sat at nearly 4,000 feet elevation, surrounded by rocky hills dotted with creosote bushes and the occasional hardy mesquite tree. It was beautiful in its harsh way, all browns and golds under an impossibly blue sky, and Penelope loved it with a fierceness that surprised even her. She tied Thunder outside the general store and pushed through the door, grateful for the relative coolness inside. Mrs. Patterson, the store owner's wife, was behind the counter, and her lips thinned into a disapproving line the moment she spotted Penelope. "Miss Hart," she said, her tone making the title sound like an insult. "I suppose you have been out shooting again, on a Sunday." "The bottles do not care what day it is," Penelope replied cheerfully, refusing to let the woman's judgment dampen her mood. "I need ammunition and some of that peppermint candy my father likes." Mrs. Patterson retrieved the items with obvious reluctance, as if she feared that serving Penelope might somehow taint her own reputation. You know, my niece is visiting from Tucson. She is 20 years old and already engaged to a lawyer, a respectable lawyer with excellent prospects. Penelope counted out coins and placed them on the counter. How nice for her. I hope she loves him. Love, Mrs. Patterson sniffed, as if the word itself was somehow improper. Marriage is about stability and respectability, not love. The sooner you learn that, the sooner you might actually find a husband. Then I suppose I will be single forever, Penelope said, collecting her purchases, because I have no interest in a marriage without love. She left the store before Mrs. Patterson could launch into another lecture and nearly collided with a man coming up the steps. He caught her elbow to steady her, and she found herself looking up into the most striking pair of gray eyes she had ever seen. "Pardon me, miss," he said, releasing her arm immediately and stepping back. I was not watching where I was going. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his life doing physical work. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and slightly too long, curling against his collar. He wore simple clothes, dusty from travel, and his boots were worn but well maintained. There was something about his face that caught her attention, a quiet strength in the lines of it, and a sadness in his eyes that made her curious. "No harm done," Penelope said, studying him with open interest. She did not recognize him, which meant he was new to Oatman. "Are you just passing through? Actually, I am looking for work," he said, and his voice was deep and pleasant, with a slight accent she could not quite place. "Someone in Kingman told me the Hart Ranch might be hiring hands." Penelope's eyebrows rose. "Did they now? What is your name?" "Yates Thompson," he said, meeting her gaze directly. Most men either stared at her beauty or refused to look at her at all, intimidated by her reputation, but this man simply looked at her like she was a person, nothing more or less. "I have experience with horses and cattle, and I am not afraid of hard work." "Yates Thompson," she repeated, testing the name. "Where are you from?" "Most recently Colorado," he said. "Before that, a lot of places. I have been drifting since I was 17. She should have gone home, should have simply directed him to her father's ranch and continued on her way. Instead, she found herself saying, "I am headed back to the ranch now. You can ride with me and meet my father." His eyes flickered with surprise and something that might have been pleasure. "That is kind of you. I have a horse at the livery." They walked together down the street, and Penelope was acutely aware of the eyes watching them from windows and doorways. By evening, half the town would be gossiping about how Penelope Hart had been seen walking with a strange man, further proof of her unsuitability for decent society. Yates collected his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that looked like it had seen a lot of miles, and they rode out of town together. Penelope set a quick pace, wanting to see if he could keep up, and Yates matched her easily without complaint. Thunder tried to bite his horse once, and Yates simply moved the gelding out of range with a slight shift of his weight, not even bothering to use the reins. "You ride well," Penelope observed, "for someone who has been drifting." "I grew up on a ranch in Texas," Yates said, his gaze fixed on the rocky trail ahead. "My father raised horses. I learned to ride before I could walk." "What brought you to Arizona?" Something crossed his face, a shadow of old pain. "I needed a change of scenery." Penelope recognized the tone of someone who did not want to discuss the past, so she let the subject drop. She knew about painful histories. Her own had left scars that no one could see. The Hart Ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, sprawling across a valley where water from a spring kept the grass relatively green despite the desert climate. The house was large and well built, constructed of adobe and wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. There were corrals and outbuildings, a large barn, and in the distance, She could see some of the ranch hands working with the horses. Samuel Hart was standing on the porch when they rode up, a tall man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent his life outdoors. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to knowing amusement when he saw his daughter. "Found another stray?" he asked, coming down the steps. "This one says he can work with horses," Penelope said, swinging down from Thunder's back. "His name is Yates Thompson, and he is looking for work." Yates dismounted and extended his hand. "Sir, I have experience breaking and training horses, managing cattle, general ranch work. I am willing to do whatever needs doing." Samuel shook his hand, and Penelope knew her father was assessing the younger man with the shrewdness that had made him successful in both mining and ranching. "We can always use good hands, especially with horses. My daughter has been bringing in wild mustangs faster than we can gentle them. You have references." "I worked for the Blackwell Ranch in Colorado for 2 years," Yates said. "Before that, the Triple Bar in New Mexico. I can give you names if you want to send telegrams." "That will not be necessary just yet," Samuel said. "We will try you out for a week, see how you do. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board. The bunkhouse is clean and our cook is better than most." "That sounds fair, sir. Thank you." Samuel nodded and called for one of the other hands to show Yates where to stable his horse and get settled. As Yates led his gelding away, Samuel turned to his daughter with a knowing look. "Do not," Penelope warned, holding up a hand. "Do not what?" Samuel asked, his eyes twinkling. "I was merely going to observe that you have never personally escorted a potential ranch hand home before." "He seemed capable," Penelope said defensively, "and I was coming this way anyway." "Of course," Samuel agreed, far too readily. "It had nothing to do with the fact that he is a good-looking young man who did not immediately run away from you." Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks, which annoyed her. She prided herself on never blushing. "You are being ridiculous." "Am I?" Samuel put his arm around her shoulders and walked with her toward the house. "Penny, you know I have never pressured you to marry. Your mother and I want you to be happy, whatever that looks like, but I also know that you are lonely, even if you will not admit it." The use of her childhood nickname made her throat tight. "I am not lonely. I have you and Mother and the horses and my freedom. That is more than most women can say." "It is," Samuel agreed. "But it is also not enough, not really. You are allowed to want more, sweetheart. You are allowed to want love and partnership and someone who sees you for who you really are." Penelope did not answer because she did not trust her voice. Her father knew her too well, had always understood her better than anyone else. He was right that she was lonely, desperately so sometimes, but she had convinced herself that loneliness was better than the alternative of becoming someone she was not. Over the next several days, Yates proved himself to be everything he had claimed and more. He was patient with the horses, firm but never cruel, and he had an instinctive understanding of how to read their behavior. Penelope found herself watching him work more than was probably appropriate, fascinated by the quiet competence he brought to everything he did. He was different from the other ranch hands, most of whom treated her with either exaggerated deference because she was the boss's daughter or barely concealed resentment, because she was a woman who refused to stay in her place. Yates simply treated her like a person, speaking to her directly, listening when she talked, and not seeming to care one bit that she wore pants and could rope a steer as well as any man. On the 4th day of his employment, she found him in one of the corrals with a young Mustang mare that had been giving everyone trouble. The horse was beautiful, a dappled gray with intelligent eyes, but she was skittish and aggressive, lashing out with teeth and hooves at anyone who came near. Penelope leaned on the fence and watched as Yates stood in the center of the corral, not approaching the mare, just standing there calmly. The horse watched him with suspicion, her ears flat against her head. Minutes passed, and he did not move. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the mare's ears came forward. She took a step toward him, then another. It took nearly an hour, but eventually the mare walked right up to Yates and pressed her nose against his chest. He raised one hand very slowly and touched her neck, and the horse did not flinch. "How did you do that?" Penelope asked softly, not wanting to startle the mare. Yates glanced over at her, and she saw a small smile touch his lips. "I let her come to me. Most people try to impose their will on a horse, force them to submit, but horses are not looking for domination. They are looking for partnership, for someone they can trust. You just have to show them you are trustworthy." "Is that your philosophy on life in general?" Penelope asked, climbing over the fence and walking slowly toward them. The mare's ears flicked nervously, but she did not bolt. "I suppose it is," Yates said, his attention divided between Penelope and the horse. "I have found that most conflict comes from people trying to force others to be something they are not. Life gets a lot simpler when you accept people as they are." Penelope stopped a few feet away, watching the mare. "Most people would say that is naive, that sometimes people need to change, need to be better. There is a difference between growing and changing yourself, which is healthy, and being forced to change by someone else, which is not," Yates said. He was stroking the mare's neck now, long, gentle movements that made the horse's eyes half close in pleasure. "Real growth comes from within, not from external pressure." There was something about the way he said it, a conviction that came from experience rather than theory, that made Penelope wonder what his story was. She wanted to ask, wanted to know everything about him, but she held back. He would tell her when he was ready, or he would not. She would not force it. "What do you think about her?" Yates asked, nodding at the mare. "Do you think she can be gentled?" "Absolutely," Penelope said without hesitation. "She is scared, not mean. Someone probably treated her roughly before she was captured. She just needs time and patience." "That is what I thought too," Yates said, and the approval in his voice sent a warm feeling through her chest. "Would you like to help me with her?" They spent the rest of the afternoon working with the mare together, and Penelope could not remember the last time she had enjoyed herself so much. Yates did not try to take over or tell her what to do, and he did not treat her like she was fragile or ignorant. They worked together as equals, reading each other's movements instinctively, communicating as much through gesture and glance as through words. By the time the sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange, the mare was allowing both of them to touch her, and Penelope could see the fear slowly draining from the animal's eyes. "She is going to be magnificent," Yates said, giving the mare one final pat before stepping away. "A few more weeks and she will be ready for a saddle." "You are very good with horses," Penelope said, walking beside him out of the corral. "Why were you drifting instead of working on a ranch?" Yates was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Sometimes staying in one place is harder than moving," he said finally. "Sometimes you need to keep moving because if you stop, you have to face things you are not ready to face. What were you running from?" He looked at her then, and she saw the shadows in his gray eyes. "Myself, mostly. The person I used to be, the mistakes I made." He paused, then added, "and a marriage that destroyed both of us." Penelope's breath caught. She had not expected that confession. "You were married?" "For 3 years," Yates said, his voice flat. "Her name was Catherine. She was beautiful and educated and everything a man was supposed to want. The problem was that she wanted me to be something I was not, and I wanted her to be someone she was not. We spent 3 years trying to change each other, making each other miserable in the process. When she finally left me for a banker in Denver, it was almost a relief." "I am sorry," Penelope said, and meant it. She understood that kind of pain, the slow death of trying to be something you were not. "Do not be," Yates said. "It taught me something important. It taught me that you cannot build a life with someone by changing who you are at your core. You can compromise on small things, meet each other halfway on practical matters, but the fundamental things, the things that make you who you are, those have to be accepted. Otherwise, you are just two people slowly suffocating each other." They had reached the barn, and the evening was settling around them, soft and quiet. Penelope looked at this man who had appeared in her life less than a week ago and felt something shift inside her chest, something that felt dangerous and exciting and terrifying all at once. "Most people would not agree with you," she said softly. "Most people think marriage is about one person, usually the woman, molding herself to fit the other person's expectations. Then most people are building marriages on sand," Yates said. He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her heart beat faster. "You should never have to make yourself smaller to fit someone else's idea of who you should be, Penelope. Anyone who asks that of you does not deserve you." No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her like she was perfectly fine exactly as she was. Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely, not wanting him to see. "You do not even know me," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "For all you know, I am exactly as terrible as everyone says I am." "What do they say?" Yates asked, and there was a hint of amusement in his voice now. "That I am wild and uncontrollable, that I have no sense of propriety or respect for convention, that I am stubborn and opinionated and completely unsuitable for marriage." She listed the accusations that had been thrown at her so many times they no longer even stung. "Well, you are certainly stubborn and opinionated," Yates said, and she looked up sharply, expecting judgment. Instead, she saw warmth in his eyes. "And you do not seem to care much for convention. But those are not flaws, Penelope. Those are strengths. The world needs more people willing to be themselves, not fewer." "That is easy to say," Penelope said, though her voice was gentler now. "Harder to believe." "Then I will say it as many times as you need to hear it," Yates said simply. "You are perfect as you are." The words hung in the air between them, and Penelope felt something inside her chest crack open, some protective wall she had built around her heart beginning to crumble. She wanted to step closer to him, wanted to close the distance between them, but fear held her back. Fear that if she let herself hope, let herself believe that someone could really accept her as she was, she would only be setting herself up for disappointment. Before she could decide what to do, her father's voice called from the house, summoning them for dinner, and the moment passed. But as they walked toward the house together, their hands nearly touching, Penelope knew that something had changed. Something had shifted between them that could not be shifted back. Over the following weeks, Penelope and Yates spent more and more time together. It started as work, training horses and managing the ranch, but it became something more. They would ride out into the desert together in the early mornings, watching the sun rise over the mountains. They would talk late into the evening, sitting on the corral fence after everyone else had gone to bed, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Yates told her about growing up in Texas, about his father who had been a hard man but a fair one, about his mother who had died when he was 12. He told her about the years after his marriage ended, drifting from town to town, working just long enough to earn money before moving on again, running from the failure and the pain. Penelope told him things she had never told anyone, about how alone she had felt even surrounded by people, about the pressure to conform to expectations that felt like they would crush her, about her fear that she would never find someone who could love her for who she really was instead of who they wanted her to be. "You will," Yates told her one night, the stars spread out above them like diamonds on velvet. "You already have." Penelope's breath caught in her throat. "Yates, I am not asking for anything," he said quickly, as if afraid she would bolt like one of the wild horses they gentled. "I just want you to know, I see you, Penelope. All of you exactly as you are, and you are the most extraordinary person I have ever met." She turned to look at him then, and in the moonlight she could see his face clearly, see the honesty and vulnerability there. "You are not afraid of me." "Afraid?" Yates looked genuinely confused. "Why would I be afraid of you? Most men are," Penelope said. "They are afraid I will make them look weak, afraid I will embarrass them, afraid they will not be able to control me." "Penelope," Yates said, and his voice was very gentle, "I do not want to control you. I want to stand beside you and watch you be everything you are meant to be. I want to be the person who supports you, who encourages you, who loves you for exactly who you are." He paused, then added, "If you will let me." Penelope felt tears spill down her cheeks, and she did not try to stop them. "I am going to disappoint you. I am going to be too wild, too stubborn, too much." "You could never be too much," Yates said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away and wipe the tears from her cheeks with his thumb. "You are exactly enough." She kissed him then, closing the distance between them, and it felt like coming home. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and she felt safe in a way she had never felt safe before. Not safe like being protected, but safe like being truly known and still loved. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Penelope Hart. I love your wildness and your stubbornness and your refusal to be anything other than yourself. I love how you gentle horses with patience and kindness. I love how you speak your mind even when you know people will not like what you have to say. I love everything about you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you if you will let me." "Yes," Penelope whispered, the word feeling like a leap off a cliff and the most natural thing in the world all at once. "Yes, I will let you. Because I love you too, Yates Thompson. I love how you see me, how you listen to me, how you treat me like an equal. I love your patience and your kindness and the way you gentle not just horses but people too. I love you, and I want to build a life with you." They sat there together under the stars for a long time, holding each other, and Penelope felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope that she could have everything she wanted, that she did not have to choose between being herself and being loved. Of course, not everyone in Oatman shared their happiness. When Penelope and Yates announced their engagement 3 months later, the town erupted in scandalized gossip. How could Samuel Hart allow his daughter to marry a drifter, a man with nothing to his name but a horse and the clothes on his back? What kind of marriage could possibly work when the woman was so obviously the dominant partner? Mrs. Patterson stopped by the ranch specifically to share her concerns with Margaret Hart, who listened with barely concealed amusement as the older woman predicted disaster. "Mark my words, Margaret, this marriage will be a catastrophe," Mrs. Patterson declared, her face red with indignation. "That girl needs a firm hand, not a man who will indulge her every whim." "My daughter does not need a firm hand," Margaret replied, her voice cold. "She needs a partner who respects her, and she has found one. I suggest you worry about your own affairs, Clara, and leave my family to manage ours." The wedding took place on a crisp October morning in 1882, with the desert air finally cooling after the brutal summer heat. They held it at the ranch rather than in town, unwilling to subject themselves to the judgment of people who had never understood Penelope anyway. The guest list was small, just family and the ranch hands who had become friends, and the ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Penelope wore a dress, but not a traditional wedding gown. Instead, she wore a beautiful split skirt in deep blue with a white blouse, practical and elegant at once. Yates wore his best suit, and when he saw her walking toward him across the desert grass, his eyes filled with tears. "You are so beautiful," he whispered when she reached him, taking her hands in his. "So are you," she whispered back and meant it. He was beautiful in his happiness, in his openness, in the way he looked at her like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. The ceremony was conducted by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through, and when he asked if anyone objected to the marriage, there was only supportive silence. When he finally pronounced them married, Yates kissed her like she was precious and powerful all at once, and the small gathering cheered. They spent their wedding night in the house that Samuel had built for them on the far edge of the ranch property, a beautiful adobe structure with large windows that looked out over the desert. It was far enough from the main house to provide privacy, but close enough that Penelope could still be involved in running the ranch. "Are you happy?" Yates asked her as they stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "Happier than I ever thought I could be," Penelope said honestly. She turned to face him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me," she said. "For loving me, for not trying to change me." "Penelope," Yates said, his gray eyes serious. "I will never try to change you. I fell in love with who you are, not who I thought I could make you become. That is a promise I make to you now and will keep for the rest of my life." He carried her inside then, both of them laughing, and they spent their first night as husband and wife learning each other in the soft darkness, gentle and passionate and perfect. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. They had to learn how to live together, how to navigate disagreements, how to balance their own needs with their partnership. But the foundation they had built on acceptance and genuine love made everything easier. Yates never tried to stop Penelope from being who she was. When she wanted to ride out alone into the desert, he let her go without question. When she had strong opinions about how the ranch should be run, he listened and often agreed, and when he disagreed, they discussed it as equals until they found a solution they could both live with. When she wanted to wear pants and break horses and outshoot the men at the 4th of July competition, he cheered her on, and Penelope, in turn, supported Yates as he slowly healed from the wounds his first marriage had left. She encouraged him when he doubted himself, held him when the old pain surfaced, and reminded him constantly that he was worthy of love and happiness. They worked together on the ranch, building it into something even more successful than Samuel had managed alone. Penelope's eye for good horses combined with Yates's training skills made them renowned throughout the territory. Buyers came from as far as California to purchase their gentled Mustangs and trained riding horses. The town gossips eventually found other scandals to occupy their attention, though they never quite forgave Penelope for being happy in a marriage that should not have worked according to all their rules. Mrs. Patterson would sniff disapprovingly whenever she saw the Thompsons ride into town together, both of them wearing practical riding clothes, both of them clearly happy. In the spring of 1884, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified, afraid that motherhood would change everything, would force her into a mold she had spent her whole life avoiding. Yates found her crying in the barn one evening and he sat beside her in the hay, holding her hand. "Talk to me," he said gently. "What if I am terrible at this?" Penelope asked, her voice small. "What if I do not know how to be a mother? What if the baby needs me to be someone I am not?" "The baby will need you to be exactly who you are," Yates said firmly. "Strong and capable and honest and kind. Those are the things that matter, Penelope." not whether you embroider samplers or host tea parties. Our child will be lucky to have a mother who teaches them to be themselves, no matter what the world says." "You really believe that?" "With everything I am," Yates said. He placed his hand over her still flat stomach. "This child is made from our love, Penelope. How could they be anything but wonderful?" Their son was born in January of 1885, during a rare, cold snap that dusted the desert with snow. He was strong and healthy, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and they named him Samuel, after Penelope's father. Motherhood changed Penelope, but not in the ways she had feared. She did not become softer or more conventional. Instead, she became fiercer, more determined to build a world where her son could grow up free to be himself, just as she and Yates had found the freedom to be themselves. She carried baby Samuel with her as she worked on the ranch, tied to her chest in a sling that scandalized the town women. She nursed him in the barn while overseeing horse training. She taught him to ride almost before he could walk, and she told him stories not about princes and princesses, but about real people who had the courage to live authentic lives. Yates was a devoted father, patient and playful and endlessly loving. He would sit for hours with Samuel, reading to him, teaching him about horses and the desert, showing him how to be gentle and strong at the same time. When Samuel was 2, Penelope became pregnant again. This time she was not afraid. This time she knew exactly what kind of mother she wanted to be, and she knew that Yates would support her every step of the way. Their daughter was born in the autumn of 1887, during the beautiful season when the desert cooled and came alive. She was tiny and perfect, with blonde hair that came from some ancestor neither of them could trace, and her mother's fierce spirit visible from the moment she opened her eyes. They named her Caroline after Yates's mother. The ranch continued to thrive, and so did their family. Samuel grew into a thoughtful, kind boy who loved horses as much as his parents did. Caroline was wild and adventurous, always getting into things she should not, and Penelope saw so much of herself in her daughter that it made her heart ache. Samuel Hart, Penelope's father, lived long enough to see both his grandchildren born, and he died peacefully in his sleep in 1888, content in the knowledge that his daughter had found the happiness he had always wanted for her. Margaret mourned deeply, but found solace in her grandchildren, and in the knowledge that Samuel had lived a good, full life. By 1890, the Thompson Ranch was one of the most successful in Arizona territory. They had expanded their operations, hired more hands, and built a reputation for honest dealing and excellent horses that reached all the way to the East Coast. Penelope was 31 now, and sometimes when she looked in the mirror, she marveled at the life she had built. She had everything she had ever wanted, and things she had not even known to hope for. She had work that fulfilled her, children she adored, and a husband who loved her more with each passing year. Yates, at 33, had lost the haunted look he had carried when he first arrived in Oatman. He was confident now, successful, deeply happy. He still gentled horses with the same patience and kindness he had shown that first day, and he gentled his children with the same approach, letting them come to him, earning their trust rather than demanding their obedience. One evening in late spring, they sat together on the porch of their house, watching Samuel and Caroline play in the yard. Samuel was 5 now, carefully showing his younger sister how to braid a rope, and Caroline was trying her best to follow his instructions despite her 3-year-old hands not quite cooperating. "You ever regret it?" Penelope asked, leaning against Yates's shoulder. "Marrying me, I mean." Taking on all the judgment and gossip that came with it. Yates looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Regret marrying you? Penelope, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Marrying you was the first truly smart decision I made in my entire life." "I am serious," she said, though she could not help smiling. "It would have been easier for you to marry someone more conventional, someone the town approved of." "Easier and infinitely more miserable," Yates said. He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "Penelope, I spent 3 years in a marriage where I was miserable every single day because we were both trying to be people we were not. Then I met you, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly loved. You love me for who I am, flaws and all, and I love you the same way. That is worth every bit of gossip and judgment in the world." "I love you," Penelope said, the words still feeling as new and exciting as they had the first time she said them. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Yates said. "You are perfect as you are. You always have been." They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, turning the sky to fire, and in the yard their children laughed. It was not a perfect life, because perfect lives did not exist, but it was a real life, an honest life, a life built on acceptance and love and the courage to be themselves. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. In 1892, Penelope gave birth to their third child, another boy they named James. He was a happy, easy baby who seemed to find delight in everything, and his cheerful disposition brightened their lives even more. The ranch continued to grow, and Yates and Penelope worked as true partners in every sense of the word. They made decisions together, shared the workload equally, and supported each other through difficult times. When drought hit the territory in 1893, threatening their water supply and their livelihood, they faced it together, finding creative solutions and refusing to give up. Samuel grew into a young man who combined his father's quiet strength with his mother's fierce determination. Caroline remained wild and fearless, a girl who climbed trees and rode horses bareback, and refused to let anyone tell her she could not do something because she was female. James was the peacemaker of the family, the one who could smooth over any conflict with his gentle humor and genuine kindness. Penelope and Yates taught all 3 of their children the lessons they had learned through hard experience. They taught them that love meant acceptance, not control. They taught them that being true to yourself was more important than meeting other people's expectations. They taught them that the right person would never try to change who you were at your core. When Arizona became a state in 1912, Penelope was 53 years old. She and Yates had been married for 30 years, and they were still as in love as they had been on their wedding day. Their children were grown now, building lives of their own, but they all stayed close, drawn back to the ranch where they had grown up free and loved. Samuel had married a schoolteacher named Rebecca, a smart, independent woman who reminded Yates a great deal of his wife. They had 2 children and lived on a portion of the ranch land, working alongside his parents. Caroline had become a veterinarian, one of the few women in the profession, and had opened a practice in Phoenix. She visited often, bringing stories of her adventures in the growing city and her ongoing battles against men who thought women had no place in medicine. James had surprised everyone by becoming a writer, documenting the changing West in novels and essays that were gaining recognition throughout the country. He lived in Oatman, in a small house near the main ranch, and spent his days writing and helping manage the ranch's business affairs. Margaret Hart had passed away peacefully in 1895, and her loss had been hard on Penelope. But she took comfort in knowing that her mother had lived to see her happy, to see her children thriving, to know that the choice Penelope had made to stay true to herself had been the right one. The town of Oatman had changed over the years too. As the older generation died off and new people moved in, The rigid social conventions that had once governed everything began to relax. Penelope was no longer seen as a scandalous, wild woman, but rather as a respected rancher and businesswoman. Young women would sometimes seek her out, asking for advice on how to navigate a world that still tried to force them into narrow roles. "Be yourself," Penelope would tell them. "Find someone who loves you for who you are, not who they think you should be. And never make yourself smaller to fit someone else's expectations." On a cool evening in November of 1920, Penelope and Yates celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray and their faces lined with age, but their love had only deepened with time. They sat together on the porch, just as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sun set over the desert they both loved. Their children and grandchildren had visited earlier, filling the house with laughter and noise, but now it was just the two of them enjoying the peaceful quiet. "You remember the day we met?" Penelope asked, her hand in Yates's. "Of course," Yates said. "You nearly ran me over outside the general store. You were carrying ammunition and peppermint candy, and you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." "I thought you were handsome," Penelope admitted, "and sad. I wanted to know your story." "And I wanted to know yours," Yates said. "I had no idea that the woman I met that day would become my entire world." "We have had a good life," Penelope said softly, resting her head on his shoulder. "A really good life." "The best life," Yates agreed. He kissed the top of her head. "And you know what the best part is? I still feel exactly the same way about you that I did the day I first told you I loved you. You are still perfect as you are, Penelope. You always have been and you always will be." Tears filled Penelope's eyes, happy tears this time. "I love you, Yates Thompson. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for letting me be myself." "Thank you for being yourself," Yates said. "Thank you for being brave enough to refuse to change for anyone. Thank you for showing our children what real love looks like. Thank you for being my partner, my best friend, my everything." They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, filling the desert sky with light. They were older now, their bodies not as strong as they once were, but their love was stronger than ever. They had built a life together based on acceptance and respect and genuine affection, and that foundation had proven unshakable. In the years that followed, they continued to work the ranch together, though they gradually handed over more responsibilities to Samuel and his family. They spent time with their grandchildren, teaching them the same lessons they had taught their children. They took long rides into the desert, just the two of them, enjoying the beauty of the land they loved and the companionship they had built over decades together. Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1925, at the age of 68. Penelope woke that morning to find him gone, and though the grief nearly destroyed her, she found comfort in knowing that they had loved each other completely, that they had built a beautiful life together, that they had never wasted a single day pretending to be anything other than who they truly were. She lived for another 10 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them benefiting from the lessons she and Yates had taught about being true to yourself and loving others for who they really are. When she finally closed her eyes for the last time in 1935, at the age of 76, she was at peace, knowing that she had lived her life on her own terms and had found true love in the process. The Thompson Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. But the foundation remained the same, built on the love between a woman who was too wild for marriage and a cowboy who said she was perfect as she was. Their story became legend in the family, told and retold to each new generation. It became a reminder that real love is not about changing someone to fit your expectations, but about accepting them exactly as they are. It became proof that the right person will never try to make you smaller, will never ask you to be anything other than yourself. On the ranch, in a quiet corner near the house Yates had built for his bride, two headstones stood side by side. They were simple markers, nothing fancy, inscribed with names and dates. But on Penelope's stone, below her name, were 4 words that captured the essence of their love story. Perfect as she was, and on Yates's stone, placed there by their children. He saw her heart. The desert wind blew across the stones, carrying with it the scent of sage and creosote, and somewhere in the distance, wild horses ran free across the land, just as Penelope and Yates had run free in their love for each other. Their story was over, but its impact would continue forever, a testament to the transformative power of accepting someone completely and the beautiful life that can be built when two people have the courage to love each other exactly as they are. The youngest great-grandchildren would sometimes play near those stones, and when they were old enough to understand, they would hear the story of their great-great-grandparents. They would learn about the woman who refused to conform and the man who loved her for it. They would learn that being yourself is the bravest thing you can do, and that finding someone who loves you for who you really are is the greatest gift in the world. And in learning these lessons, they would carry forward the legacy of Penelope and Yates Thompson, ensuring that their love story would never truly end but would continue to inspire and guide generations to come. Because some love stories are not just about the two people who lived them but about the truth they reveal, the hope they inspire, and the courage they give to others to seek the same kind of authentic, accepting, transformative love. In the end, that was the real magic of their story. Not that it was extraordinary, though it was, but that it proved what was possible when two people chose to see each other clearly, love each other completely, and build a life together based on acceptance rather than expectation. It proved that you do not have to change who you are to be loved, that the right person will embrace your wildness rather than try to tame it, and that the best love stories are the ones where both people get to be fully, authentically, completely themselves. Penelope and Yates had found that kind of love in a dusty mining town in the Arizona desert in 1882, and they had held on to it through 38 years of marriage, through challenges and triumphs, through the changing of the world around them. They had built not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of love, acceptance, and courage that would outlive them both by generations. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this life, they were together still, riding across desert landscapes under endless skies, two souls who had found each other against all odds and had loved each other perfectly, exactly as they were.